We're going to look at the steps that you use in order to multiply fractions and even to multiply with mixed numbers. But first, let's talk about different ways to represent multiplication. One of the ways that you can represent multiplication is by just having two things next to each other in parentheses. That's like a secret code that mathematicians use to represent multiplying. Also, we can represent multiplication by using what is called just a dot. And when we talk about just a dot, for some reason in the computer world, it changed this on me. And so it's not making the dot the way that I would want it to be. And so what we are going to do is we're just going to fill in, instead of that little square, it should simply be a dot, like a little circle, boom, 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 in the center of it. Not sure why it showed up that way, but it did. And so 2/3 with a dot in between and 3/8, that would represent multiplication. So here's the steps. First thing that we do is we will convert all mixed numbers to improper fractions. You want to make sure that you convert those mixed numbers because when you're multiplying fractions, you cannot have that whole number in the way. It's got to be an improper fraction. Step number 2, we will cross cancel if it is possible. It's not always possible. Then we're going to multiply the numerators. And it's important that you remember that we multiply straight across. Numerator times numerator. Then we multiply the denominators. Again, we multiply straight across. Denominator times denominator. And lastly, you're going to simplify if it is possible. It's not always possible, especially if you have cross-canceled, but sometimes it still is, even if you have cross-canceled. So it's important to always check. So let's look at this first problem. We have 3/5, and we see how it's represented in parentheses, and we're going to multiply that times 2/3. So I'm going to look diagonally. So for example, I'm going to look this way and ask myself, is there anything that 5 and 2 can both be divided by that would make those numbers smaller and easier to work with? Well, no, there's not. Well, what about 3 and 3? Is there anything I can multiply 3 and 3 by, divide 3 and 3 by that would make them easier? Well, yeah, I can divide them both by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. So now I've made those numbers much smaller. 1 is always going to be easier to work with than 3 is. I rewrite the problem so that I don't have all this mess in my way, and now I'm going to multiply. 1 times 2 is 2. 5 times 1 is 5. 2/5 cannot be simplified, so I know that that is my final answer. Now this one, we have 5 times 2/15. Well, before I can multiply with 5, I need to rewrite it as a fraction. So I'm going to write it as 5/1. Then I'm going to look at my cross-canceling. I'm going to look diagonal, 1 and 2. Is there anything that those two numbers can be divided by that will make them smaller? No. 5 and 15, yes. 5 and 15 can both be divided by 5. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to divide them both by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 15 divided by 5 is 3. So then I'm going to have 1/1 times 2/3, and I'm going to multiply across. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 3 is 3. So 2/3 then is my answer. Let's look at one more. I'm going to rewrite this. 2 1/2 times 4 2/5. I'm going to use around the world to convert these into improper fractions. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So this is really the same as 5/2. I'm going to do the same thing here. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 2. So that gives me 22/5. Now I'm going to look and ask myself, is there anything that 2 and 22 can both be divided by that will make them smaller? And my answer is yes. I can divide them both by 2. So that's what I'm going to do. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 22 divided by 2 is 11. Now what about 5 and 5? What can they both be divided by? Well, that's 5. I'm going to divide them both by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So now let me rewrite my problem. It's 1 over 1 times 11 over 1. And then I'm going to multiply across. 1 times 11 is 11. 1 times 1 is 1. 11 over 1 simplifies to 11.